In the Gun, episode number 54. We have got plenty to get to here as some conference realignment rumors are running wild, brother. It is a conference realignment season. We've got some portal updates. And, of course, we have to talk a little bit about this Mountaineer baseball team that now finds itself for the first time in program history in the top 10 rankings. But I'm Wesley Uhler. No Big O today. Owen has got some other stuff going on. If you listened to our episode last week, you know that my wife and I are in the final days here before welcoming our second child into the world. So with this kind of big conference news today, with some recent portal updates, Jed and I wanted to make sure that we were hopping on here and knocking out an episode for this week. So you just got me, the host, Wesley Uhler, along with the signal caller, Jed Drenning. And I tell you what, Jed, exciting times, certainly. For me personally, for the baseball team. I mean, we got a lot to get into here. I love it.
I mean, first of all, you dropped that on the podcast last week on the episode, and it took over the comment section, right?
It did. I saw that. Yeah,
there's a bunch of dads and
thank you to everybody who said congratulations.
I do appreciate Mountaineer Nation rallied behind you for the big day.
That was very nice,
up, right? So
that was very nice.
Yeah, we wanted to cut you loose as soon as possible so you can kind of just focus on what kind of matters most for the rest of the week, right?
But busy few days for sure.
Exciting times. Not your first rodeo, right? We've been through that, but
that's it. But always exciting, right?
You know, some exciting stuff going on with the baseball program. You said last week, Wes, when we taped last week, you said, look, if we win this series this weekend against Texas Tech, don't look now, but we could be in the top 10. Now, you're the seer here, right? Yeah. So we won the series. We didn't just win the series, won 2 out of 3, but that's 17-2 shellacking on Saturday. Whoa, we took them behind the woodshed for that one.
Big time. Yeah.
Again, we said it last week about this team. It has that vibe. It has that feel. So some exciting things going on. We were sharing back and forth in our thread that we text between the three of us, some of the things that John Antonic had pointed out. And there's some really interesting stuff going on. John pointed out in his tweet, for those interested, the number 6 ranking in the D1Baseball.com poll is the second highest in school history for WVU. The Mountaineers reached number 3 in collegiate baseball's poll on May 29th, 1963, when they were 29-1 heading into the NCAA regionals. That was one tweet that John pointed out. Another tweet he pointed out was he was talking about our number 7 ranking, first time ever in the top 10 in the 43-year history of the Baseball America poll. So the first time ever to crack that. So such cool stuff going on for Randy Mazey and company over there at Wagner Field. Again, just drove by Wagner Field again this afternoon.
It's awesome.
And every time I do, I just think, this place, really University Town Center at large has changed Morgantown. It has a very different feel than Morgantown at large, and it feels
new. It feels like a new, it feels like a new neighborhood, new city, something that just popped up. It doesn't feel like good old Morgantown. Yeah,
you keep on chucking, man. I mean, you get the sense that this story's kind of just winding up. It's not winding down. It's kind of just winding up. Now let's see where this thing can go, because this team feels like it has all the potential in the world.
Absolutely. And a huge one this weekend, May 18th, 19th, and 20th, final regular season series in Texas against those Longhorns. And I think that's kind of fitting because they have arguably been the best baseball program in the conference for a while. And for WVU to have to go on the road down there to Austin, you have a chance you win this series to win the Big 12 regular season title. I think it's pretty apt that your last series of the season, everything's right in front of you. Go win this series and your Big 12 regular season champs. And you got to go through, the games are going to be on the Longhorn Network and it's going to be all the Texas production and everything. It's a fitting way to, I think, finally kick the door in. That's where I'm going with all this. And so, whether I'm at home, whether I'm in the hospital room, I can't wait to watch.
You're going to be somewhere paying attention. Here's what's funny, mentioning Texas. I was in and out of Morgantown. I was working my way around north central West Virginia today. I stopped a dozen places for work and whatnot. But in the middle of that, my son had a road trip, a field trip with his third grade class, I should say, from Davis Thomas Elementary. So second, third, and fourth went down, and they spent part of the day at the trampoline park in Morgantown. So I dropped him and my wife off this morning, and I took off down to Fairmont and Clarksburg. Came back and got him this afternoon. Well, I came back this afternoon. The second half of the day was spent at the new aquatic center up behind Milan Park, which I don't know if you've been there or not. I've been to a couple.
I haven't, but I know what you're talking about.
It's immaculate. It's just incredible. That facility is a great place for birthday parties and school functions like that. but showed up there. And I thought that some of the Davis Thomas parents might end up getting in a fight because we saw some Texas gear coming in. I guess the Texas swim team is in town. And one of the teachers kind of joked to me, I don't want to get a fight on my kid's school trip. Come on, horns down. And she starts talking some yak. She said, I better tone it down here a little bit. So the Longhorns were in town at the Aquatic Center as well. So meanwhile, the baseball teams have got about to head south and try and smack them around down in Austin.
Let's go.
Good stuff.
No, absolutely. Big things happening. It might be the end of May. We might be rolling into June. School might be letting out and all those things, but still a lot to keep an eye on with the Mountaineer baseball team. Horns down for sure, as we'll all be tuned in this weekend and hoping for the best for Randy Mazey and the boys. Absolutely. This episode of ITG is brought to you by BetOnline. Folks, BetOnline is your number one source for all your basketball information, stats, news, and scores. You can get all the latest odds and lines and the latest matchup reports for this year's NBA playoffs. BetOnline is your sports intel headquarters this season, and we have you covered for all your insider sports wagering needs, whether it's basketball, Major League Baseball, the NHL playoffs, golf, UFC, or boxing. The fastest and easiest way to get all your betting information, including live bet options and your favorite casino and card games available to play right from your home. So get into the action today and head to the website or use your mobile device to join, and be sure to use the promo code Bleav when you sign up to receive your 50% bonus on your first deposit. That's BLEAV at BetOnline, where the game starts. Jed, before we get to another start of conference realignment, which we know never rests in college football, right. Certainly hasn't for the last couple decades. It doesn't look like it's going to anytime soon. It is. It certainly is. We got some portal updates as well, too. It is also portal watch season. Heck, I guess now, right? 365 in college sports is portal watch season, but we got a couple I think intriguing additions to the Mountaineer football team here in the last few days.
We sure did. Now, in recent weeks, we talked about the apparent addition at the receiver spot because again, we've been looking for different role players at that spot, especially somebody on the perimeter who can kind of take the top off the defense, who brings the blaze factor to the table. So we thought we had that in Jalen Ellis, who came from Baylor, was looking for a new home, and next thing you know, he decommits. And as we joked about, all roads lead to Boulder with this portal conversation, right? Every time you turn around, Deion's in the news with it, with the Colorado Buffaloes. So Jalen Ellis decommits from West Virginia as our speed guy and commits to Deion and the Buffaloes in Boulder. So what ends up happening? Meanwhile, you got another receiver on the loose, another speed guy, E.J. Horton, 2 years at Marshall. He's another guy with some blistering speed that can take the top off things. 16 catches, 245 yards, and a couple of scores in his 2 years in Huntington. Well, guess what? He was headed to Colorado as well until we got him to decommit from Deion to head to Morgantown. Now, what's funny about it, Wes, is as you try and explore and do a deep dive into what you're getting with E.J. Horton, Colorado Buffalo YouTube was on fire about this kid. All right. They were on fire about this. I mean, everywhere you turn, Coach Prime got Shadur Sanders, his new wide receiver one. I was like, whoa, okay, that's pretty bold talk coming from Boulder. Jimmy Horn reacts to E.J. Horton transfer to Coach Prime over Marshall. E.J. Horton adds speed, all caps. I mean, these guys were, in other words, we looked at Jalen Ellis as our speed guy. They were looking at E.J. Horton as their speed guy, and we got C.J. Horton and E.J. Horton, I should say, instead of Jalen Ellis. So very interesting. But what you're going to get with E.J. Horton when you study his game, he's a guy who's explosive. He does have that 5-gear speed. He's going to take the top off things. He's going to scare the back end defensively. You're going to find spots to use him in and really throw the threat of that vertical game with what he can bring to the table. Now, I don't expect him to be terribly physical unless he changes what he does on the perimeter. So I don't know if he's going to wear people out in terms of his stock blocking game or in terms of his blocking game in general, but maybe that's something we can work on. And for that matter, once in a while you have a drop, but I don't think it's something that's plagued him. But his game is the speed game. So what I just described to you, Wes, when you think of somebody who fills that role, that's kind of the boxes that you expect to be checked when somebody arrives. They're not going to be, hands isn't their game. Physicality isn't their game. Speed is their game, unmitigated speed. So there's areas that he can grow, but he is fast as blazes. So he brings that. Now, another addition since that hit, and this was a wide receiver, interesting project here too. I won't even call him a project. A kid that's played this much college football, 5 seasons. Interesting opportunity for us here. Now, this is a different type of kid, whereas EJ Horton's more of a 6 foot, buck 70 plus speed guy. Noah Massey out of Angelo State, Division II Angelo State, we'll get into his history here, is more of a physical 6'4", 2 1/4, 230, big bodied type. Okay. Now, he spent the last couple years at Division II Angelo State. That's good football down there in the Lone Star Conference. He racked up 81 catches for over 1,000 yards, 9 touchdowns, almost hit double digits, was a red zone weapon. So he knows how to use that frame. He knows how to use that size. So very productive as a Division II player the last couple seasons. Prior to that, he spent 3 seasons at the FBS level with Bowling Green. Now, in those 3 seasons at Bowling Green, he had 10 catches, 160 plus yards, and he did catch a touchdown, interestingly enough, in 2018 against Kent State from Jarrett Dagey. So interesting little nexus there. Everything leads back to West Virginia one way or the other anyway, right? Yeah, he spent a year with Jarrett when Jarrett, remember Jarrett was at Bowling Green 17 and 18 before coming to West Virginia 19. They crossed paths in 2018. He was Noah Massey was there in 18 through 20, and then spent the last couple seasons at Angelo State. So I'm excited about the possibility of a guy with his resume, his production at multiple levels, and his frame. So you got the speed guy that we thought we lost, the more coveted speed guy by Colorado, apparently. So
according to the YouTubers.
Yeah, according to YouTubers, we got EJ Horton as the speed guy, and we got Noah Massey as a very interesting, big-bodied physical guy. And when you look at the body types we're starting to populate that room with, and we already talked about the size we had there in the spring, if you include the tight end room. So interesting what's going on in there. So continue to pay attention, because as you said, it's 365, 24/7. This portal action never ends. The window has closed. We discussed this previously.
But
so
there's still a lot of names in that portal. Yeah,
there's still a lot of names in the portal and a lot of teams with needs, and so here we are. I'm kind of excited about those two that we landed in recent days.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, that's been a position that we all knew would be addressed throughout these transfer windows. And we talked about a little bit with defensive line as well too. We've seen some additions there. Now you're starting to see him roll in a little bit at wide receiver. That's encouraging, because you need bodies at in those position groups. You've lost guys. I mean, from last year, right, Jed? I mean, I Bleav top 4 wide receivers all gone, correct? BFW, Caden Prather.
Depending on how you look at it, you can
make in terms of, I guess, production, if I use air quotes here, BFW, Caden Prather, Sam, and Reese, right? So you needed replacements, and now you've got some viable ones, some different skill sets as well too. And hey, that's I think the beauty of the portal is, as much as it can drive you crazy, as much as you can lose, it also gives you an opportunity to reload quickly, where, you know, in days of past, you lose some wide receivers and you're, oh man, now all we got are young guys and we got to recruit and we got to build this up again. Now you can go out and hopefully get, you know, some instant impact, some quick fixes here.
Devin Carter, big physical guy, had a great spring. We saw how productive he could be and the level of consistency he brought to bear. Cole Taylor in that tight end room, great addition, huge frame, 6'7". We saw consistently how productive he could be throughout the course of the spring. So it's interesting. Again, Cortez Braham, he's a little more on the physical side when you look at the rest of that room compared to some of those slot types we have in there. And it was nice to see him start to take those additional steps, especially, capping things off with a great performance in the spring game. So we got some possibilities in that room. And now these two bring some more possibilities and see what we can do with them and tinker with them. Because again, we're not done populating that room. There's going to be a couple interesting prospects that arrive in the summer in the form of true freshmen that, now again, let's not get delusional. You're not going to ask too awful much from these true freshmen.
Right.
But they're so incredibly gifted and so talented that you can limit what you ask them, and they still might have an opportunity to make some level of impact.
Like Tavon Austin's freshman year.
There you go.
You saw it in little bursts.
That's right, spurts.
But they didn't ask him. They didn't ask him to do too much. Yeah.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah. I think
showcase what they got.
blueprint for a guy like Rodney Gallagher, certainly, and hopefully you've got the young youth infusion coming up through the ranks. You've got the veterans as well too.
Yep.
Feels like
Nice.
Yeah, a couple months ago we were asking a lot of questions about that group. I mean, obviously there are still questions, but it's not personnel or in terms of do you have the bodies. Now it's what skill set and those type of things are
Well,
these
what I
guys.
like about those two big kids, Wes, including the addition of Noah Massey. When you look at Devin Carter, when you look at Noah Massey, those aren't just big kids trying to find themselves. Those are big kids, each bringing a 5-year body of work to Morgantown.
Right.
So you know what I mean? They're kind
experienced
of polished products. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. No, it's a great call by you. It absolutely is. That's exciting. That's something that we needed. And now we'll wait and see how this all plays out whenever the bullets start flying. A big thank you to Toothman Ford as well too for presenting this episode of ITG. We all know cars cost less than Grafton. Make sure you're getting your butt to Grafton and supporting Toothman. They do so much great stuff with NIL work at WVU. Get on over to Grafton for all your vehicular needs. Now, Jed, you mentioned Mr. Carter there a few minutes ago, and he transferred to WVU from North Carolina State, right? You like this transition where I'm going here.
Perfect.
And of course, NC State is in what conference, Jed?
Last I checked, they were in the ACC.
Well, it's when did you check? Because I mean, for now, yes, they are, but that could be
Gibby here and make sure. Right?
Oh, Gibby could be back in the conference coaching against it potentially. Oh no. Listen, folks, if you've listened to this, one of two things. If you've listened to this podcast over our 54 episodes, or if you're just someone who's tapped in with college football, the fact that conference realignment is nowhere close to being done or is an ever-evolving thing isn't surprising to you. We all know Texas and Oklahoma are leaving next year to join the SEC. In the same time frame, USC and UCLA, all the way out in California, are joining the Big Ten, and there's been a lot of rumors in the past week that Oregon and Washington are going to join them in the Big Ten Conference as well, too. With this, we've discussed a little bit about how, hey, the ACC might not be as safe as everybody thinks it is. Everyone's focused on the Pac-12. We've had these Brett Yormark conversations and how he's trying to get out on the front foot of a lot of this stuff. Well, we've discussed a little bit about...
Let me preface this way.
Yeah, go ahead.
As safe as you can be with a bad TV deal, you're stuck in till 2036, right? Now, go ahead.
Correct. Yeah. A lot of people think that, just because the ACC has that grant of rights where the teams have agreed, and I'm using air quotes there, to stay put till 2036. It's a terrible TV deal. You've got a conference that in a lot of ways prioritizes basketball. I mean, look what they just did with their last edition. They added Pitt, basketball school at that time. Certainly Syracuse, absolutely a basketball school. Louisville, basketball school. Boston College, basketball school. Clemson, Florida States, the Miamis of the world haven't necessarily loved this. They haven't necessarily been happy. You've got some other big brands in the ACC like North Carolina and Virginia. Well, today we got some, maybe potentially the first domino in another big wave or another big moment in conference realignment. Brett McMurphy, that's a name that college football fans are familiar with, certainly. He tweeted out this afternoon, Clemson, Florida State, Miami, North Carolina State, Virginia, and Virginia Tech, the Magnificent Seven ACC schools. These schools have met in the past several months with lawyers examining the ACC grant of rights to determine just how unbreakable it is. The current deal runs through 2036. So to read the tea leaves of that, these 7 schools have kind of come together and said, listen, this ain't working now, and it's certainly not going to work for us for the next 13 years. What can we do to shake the tree a little bit? Hey, Clemson, Florida State, Miami, you want to go to the SEC? Hey, UNC, Virginia, you looking at the Big Ten, Virginia Tech, NC State, you think you're on the move? We're all in this together, and we want to make something happen a lot quicker than 13 years from now. This, again, Jed, this is nothing seismic today, but like I said, this feels like the start of a big domino. And man, like I said, we've all been kind of focused on the Pac-12 and what's going on there when maybe the ACC could be in a very similar situation.
Yeah, there's so many directions to go with the possibilities here, right? The spasmodic 7 or whatever they're calling them. I mean, I start wondering
They
Why
should
not
call
all?
themselves the
I don't understand.
jabroni.
It's almost like it's crossed my mind, Wes. I think to get out of that grant of rights deal, these ads that I hear all day on satellite radio as I'm driving around about this legal team that'll get you out of timeshares. I mean, did the ACC call those folks? I mean, that sounds like what it's going to take.
Timeshare exit team.
That's right, the timeshare exit team to get you out of the ACC grant of rights. But so look at it like this: not only is this a bad TV deal, far inferior to what the new Big 12 media deal is, but we go back to the negotiating table several years before they do. So we got a far better deal. Brett Yormark, there you go. We got a far better deal, and we negotiate again far sooner than they do. So they desperately are looking for a way out of this. Now, the question is, and there's many questions, I should say, somebody even asked me, like I retweeted it with the kind of eyes open look, the Brett McMurphy tweet, and a Mountaineer fan responded saying, does this mean they're trying to kind of create some sort of solidarity and stick together and do something, or does it mean they'll be plucked off? Well, we don't know the answer to that. We don't know. I'm curious as to why Louisville, Pitt, Boston College, on down the line, the rest of the ACC wouldn't be equally interested in trying to get out of this abysmal deal and move to greener pastures. Now, what those greener pastures might mean, it could come in many forms, as you said. Maybe a couple of them get plucked by the SEC. Maybe a couple of them get plucked by the Big Ten. There's a lot of interesting different angles and dynamics here. Now, that sets the table for the dream scenario for us that we've always talked about.
Yes, we have.
That eastern wing of the Big 12, right? With some of our old Big 12 or Big East mates. Maybe if the Virginia Techs and the Pitts and the Louisvilles and the Boston colleges find themselves outside of alliance with a Power 5 or a Power 2, or whatever you're going to look at a conference, Power 3, then maybe we all once again end up together, and now you can maybe have a little more uniform approach to what we're doing in the Big 12 from an Eastern point, a Western point, a Midwestern point. So who really knows? But there's obviously a lot of interesting stories and dynamics. And we're going to talk also, Wes, I'm going to set you up here. Let's talk Notre Dame. Because Notre Dame, there's an X factor here with them as well, with their relationship, as loose as it might be. They kind of have their cake and eat it too with the ACC.
They certainly do.
For many years. So let's talk about the possibility there. And then we'll talk about the rumors even. You mentioned this to me off the air. Georgia Tech to the Big Ten.
That's been floated as well
we'll get
too.
Into that.
Yeah. So let's start with Notre Dame, because they're a big player for a lot of reasons. And I hate admitting that, because I do think Notre Dame thinks that it's still 1989 and they are still the straw that stirs the college football drink. They're not, but they're not nearly what they used to be, but they are obviously still a big seat at the table. Why Notre Dame is interesting in this for a couple reasons, but mostly because when the ACC schools, when they all signed this grant of rights a few years ago, when the conference realignment was running wild, brother, I'm going to keep using that Hulk Hogan line there. They agreed, the ACC, Notre Dame is a part of the ACC for every sport except for football and I believe hockey. They play in the Big Ten in hockey. But for them, it makes a lot of sense for Notre Dame, for basketball, for their Olympic sports, for soccer, for all these different things to be in the ACC, right? Yep. They get a lot of benefits out of that, as does the ACC. So part of the mutual agreement when they signed this grant of rights for the ACC was that if Notre Dame wants to be a non-football, and not that hockey matters in this conversation, so really just a non-football ACC member, they had to agree to also not join another conference until 2036. So that means that, Notre Dame, if they wanted to join the Big Ten in 3 years, they couldn't, as long as this grant. Now, they would just have to pay a massive sum of money, much like we saw Texas and Oklahoma do here. We're talking 40, 50, 60, maybe even more millions, tens of millions of dollars to negotiate your way out. Exactly. We mentioned these 7 schools. You're going to need at least 8 ACC votes to break this thing up, right? Because you have to have more than half. And if you include Notre Dame, there's 15 schools in the ACC, the 14 full-time members plus Notre Dame non-football. So if you get these 7 schools that are all ready to vote yes, and they get Notre Dame on their side, Notre Dame is that 8th and deciding vote. It doesn't matter how pissed off Pitt or Syracuse or Louisville or Boston College are, or Georgia Tech, who you just mentioned, who isn't mentioned in this as well too. That to me is the big kicker. Does Notre Dame want the ACC grant of rights to fall apart, because not anytime soon, but they think, hey, in 5 years, in 7 years, something like that, maybe we will want to join the Big Ten. Maybe all of a sudden the TV money will become more lucrative for us to join a conference as opposed to doing our own NBC thing. That's a big kind of X factor, a big wild card in this equation for me, is how does Notre Dame feel? Do they still have no semblance of joining a conference other than what they have with the ACC? And so they want it to stay together because they need that conference schedule and continuity and kind of infrastructure for all their other sports. Yes. Or is Notre Dame looking at this saying, yeah, let's get that grant of rights out of here so that if before 2036 we want to skedaddle to the Big Ten or to the SEC or whatever, we have the freedom to do that. That is, like I said, a real wild card, I think, in this conversation.
Well, Notre Dame has always revered its independence. And when you talk to Notre Dame people, part of that is their boosters. It really appeals to them. Now, they view themselves, rightly so, as a national brand. Okay, let's first hit the ACC part of this. And you're talking about the 8 necessary votes. Those are 7 schools. Notre Dame could be the wild card. I'll say this. I still remember when Maryland, where we were when this happened, when Maryland left the ACC to go to the Big Ten. To me, at that point, I was like, all right, nothing sacred holds. You have this charter member. That was a learning experience for me. And I really think that you could jostle not just Notre Dame loose, but maybe one of those others we mentioned. It wouldn't take much for them to have the vision to say, okay, this does make sense for all of us. We do need out of this. We have a better landing spot, whatever the plan might be. But let's look at Notre Dame and let's look at what's changed. Okay. You talked about way back in the early 90s when, they started off, and we jokingly say Conference NBC. Here's how much the TV landscape has changed in 30 years. If I'm not mistaken, that original NBC, that unique, one-of-a-kind, groundbreaking, we'd never seen it before. It set Notre Dame so many levels above any other program, including back in the 90s, anyone in the SEC. They were a cut above. Holy cow, you got your own TV deal? If I'm not mistaken, Wes, that was less than $10 million.
Believe so.
Now, look at what's changed since then. They see billion-dollar media rights deals being inked. So, yes, they covet their independence in part because of their boosters that also end up, that's how you grow your endowment, right? But at what point, it's part and parcel of their national branding. Well, now look at the Big Ten, for example. That is a national brand. Mm-hmm. It goes from Rutgers to USC and UCLA. I mean, how much more national can you get than that? So now let's jump to the Georgia Tech dimension of this. This is kind of what intrigues me. You've had an opportunity now. I'm not behind closed doors. I don't understand really what the straw that stirs the drink in terms of what matters to these presidents and these ADs, much less these TV decision makers. So Rutgers and Maryland entering as members of the Big Ten. The claim was, well, you bring those markets. Okay, well, what does that mean? I can see an argument.
I don't think it means anything anymore.
I mean, Rutgers' footprint in the New York market is like the footprint that you might leave in the blue lot walking through on a rainy day. There is no footprint. So if you mean,
it's like you dropping a natty light in the blue lot on a Saturday. Exactly. That's the footprint you're leaving.
But if you mean this is an opportunity to get our bigger brands, our Ohio States, our Penn States, our Michigans, or to some extent Wisconsin's, into that market and get a foothold through those as a conduit through those larger brands and get them into Madison Square Gardens, right? So I could see that making sense, but my point is this. Rutgers and Maryland have now been a part of the Big Ten for long enough for the conference to kick the tires and understand whether or not they appreciate, okay, this has worked. We are gaining purchase with our larger brands in these larger markets. It is bringing more eyes. Rutgers and Maryland aren't going to bring more eyes, but maybe the larger brands are, however they want to cross-reference and categorize that. So if they're satisfied with whatever's happening there, I don't know the answer, whether they are or they aren't. But if they are, then wouldn't Georgia Tech, of course, it checks the academic box so they can talk APR and beat their chest there. Yeah. But wouldn't Georgia Tech in the Atlanta market serve the same purpose if the Big Ten is satisfied? Not only that, but what's really intriguing about it it's a dagger right in the heart of SEC country. So there's a lot of interesting parallels. And the question I brought up to you, what happens, and we're really gaming this thing out in several steps now, but what happens if rumor becomes reality and Georgia Tech at some point receives an invite from the Big Ten? And now you got a Big Ten school right there in Atlanta.
Right in
Well, then
Atlanta.
what happens if the SEC counters? Oh, yeah, we're getting Notre Dame. If Notre Dame's truly interested, because Notre Dame, again, they're running numbers and they're looking at this. Look at the new 12-team playoff, okay? To get a bye, to be one of the 4 teams that get that first round, that critical, coveted first round bye, you have to be a conference champ. So literally, Notre Dame can go 12-0, and they're not getting a first round bye.
The best they can be is the
they'll
fifth
play
seed,
on campus in the first round, but they're not getting a bye. They're still having to play that extra game on the road to a championship or the hunt for a championship. And again, I go back to the per school cut in the Big Ten deal, the looming SEC deal. They have to be looking at this thinking, look, NBC is not going to yield $100 million anytime soon, at least
apparently they're asking for upwards of $70 million a year in their new media deal.
Well, wouldn't they have to?
They have to. I don't see
just to approach the relative numbers that these other 2 conferences are getting. Because again, you got to serve a lot of masters if you're at Notre Dame. You have to keep these boosters happy. You have to maximize your brand. And how are you really doing that if you're going to cut a media deal for half of what the Big Ten and the SEC? You can't.
Sure, you can't.
You can't. No. So even to make a compelling argument, you have to inch a little closer to that, or you have to end up in a conference one way or the other. As much as you might relish and covet your independence, maybe the time has come with national brand opportunities as a conference member to leave that behind and say, look, we can still schedule Boston College in an out-of-conference game. We can still schedule Navy in an out-of-conference game. But now, even in league games, if we join the Big Ten, we're getting our old rival USC. That's interesting to us. We're getting Michigan back on the schedule. We're getting Michigan State back on the schedule. There's a lot of intrigue there. So times do change. We've seen them change so many times just in the last handful of years. But again, I don't know what the 7-school part of this is. I don't understand why the other schools wouldn't also be asking the timeshare lawyers to try and get them out.
I think you know what, you want the answer to that, particularly if you add Notre Dame on as the 8th school. I think a big part is it is honestly, besides maybe NC State and Virginia Tech, I think those others
left behind.
I think those other schools have greener pastures. For example, if Clemson, Florida State, and Miami go to the SEC, if Virginia and UNC go to the Big Ten, that's greener pastures. And Virginia Tech and NC State, I don't see either of those as a fit for them. I think those 2 schools are much more likely to end up in the Big 12 at some point. But I think that, again, there's been a lot of rumblings for years now that Clemson and FSU want out of the ACC, that they want to go to a football conference, that they, you know, they are not like their ACC brethren that care about basketball so much and all these other things. In the Big East. And Clemson and Florida State would rather be in a conference with South Carolina and Florida than Pitt and Syracuse and Boston College. So I think I do get it for these 7 schools. I mean, it's a little bit of a probably a gut punch if you're the other schools, obviously.
I almost feel like the only way it makes sense to me is if it is a half and half proposition. Like they're going to scatter these 7 and half are going to go to the Big Ten and half are, and maybe NC State and Virginia Tech do find a way to the SEC.
Well, maybe they partner with Virginia and with North Carolina to kind of ride some coattails.
Because if they're looking at it like, hey, if we get out, then great, we can go to the Big 12. Then why wouldn't Pitt, BC, and Louisville be saying the same thing? And Syracuse, right?
Correct.
So that's why I tend to think, and again, this is pure speculation. That's the fun of it. But I tend to think those 7 separating from the pack and the others not jumping on board to champion this effort as well. Maybe that's because those 7 have some level of information sourcing that they will end up in either the Big Ten or the SEC or some.
That's a great point.
And maybe Pitt, Syracuse, Louisville don't have that information.
Well, they don't. They absolutely don't. They're
desperately trying to continue to hold together the only league they have right now in the ACC.
You can sell me on NC State and Virginia Tech being a little bit of outliers, but Clemson, Florida State, Miami, UNC. I mean, you throw Notre Dame in it. Those are much bigger brands nationally than Pitt, than Syracuse, than Boston College, than Louisville. And so I don't know. It's hilarious to me. I mean, Jed, like, I'm obviously here in Pittsburgh. Like, there's a lot of Pitt fans that are already. I was cracking up today that are like, we're not going to the Big 12. No way. I'm not going to that conference, man. No way. I saw, but Heather, like, get us into the SEC. Like, Pitt would have if you want a good laugh, go on Twitter and search Pitt SEC and look at all the Pitt fans that are like begging to get into the SEC because they know they can't get into the Big 10. That door's already been shut on them a couple times. It's hilarious. It's the same position that we were in trying to get into the ACC a decade ago, and they were pointing and laughing at us. And now the Big 12 is going to be their life raft here in a few years, their safety boat here in a few years, and we're all going to be pointing and laughing at them as they. You know what I'm going to do, Jed? You know what I'm going to do? I know you're a movie, a superhero kind of. I know you're into Star Wars and some of those things. Have you seen the Avengers movies?
Absolutely.
Thanos. You could not live with your failure. So where did it bring you? Right back to me. I'm going to be sitting there at the Big 12 gates saying that to every Pitt and Syracuse and Louisville fan. Before they join the Big 12, they just need to apologize for killing the Big East. And then I'll let them join, but I'm going to need that handwritten and signed in writing by COB on conference realignment day.
Because you know what it looks like right now? Otherwise, it looked like Thanos is going to snap. Those 7 teams are going to go to the SEC and the Big 10. And Pitt and Syracuse and Louisville are going to turn to black dust blowing in the wind. That's what it looks like, and unless something else happens. But I mean, that's a comical conversation to have, just in terms of when you think city school, not much of a fan base. Yeah, great fit for the SEC. That's
yeah, right. Exactly. And that's why too, the fact that Boston College isn't in this conversation, Syracuse, Pitt. Like that whole media, that's proof that the media market thing, all that matters is the viewership that you draw now. The Boston market, the DC market, these reasons that Boston College and Maryland and Rutgers and some of these programs got picked over WVU.
And I would say subs, man.
It doesn't matter anymore. No one wants Boston College, and it's one of the biggest sports markets in the country.
Like, I have to think, again, I'm thinking about it like this. Like, if you tapped into that New York market through Rutgers, it's just intriguing that maybe there's Ohio State and Michigan grads everywhere, right? So I really wonder how that unfolds, what role that might play now, because they're even saying like it transcends TV because the next step is the digital platform, okay? And so you might be looking at subs mattering as much as anything. Like I've even seen, and I would entertain this conversation, like if you want to think outside the box from a Big 12 perspective, I would entertain Army Navy for starters to own that game.
It's funny you say that.
If you get to a digital platform, are you going to tell me that if you have a Big 12 digital space, okay, a streaming service, that you're not going to drive more subs up by having Army and Navy? Those are the types of things you have to quantify it in different ways than you otherwise might. Now, of course, every head coach in the Big 12 is wanting to reach out and smack me right now if they hear this, because they don't want to face those.
Yeah, no chance.
On a short week, especially, much less twice a year. But so that's kind of. But then again, the rule changes have made it more difficult for Army and Navy to do what they do. But so that's fine. I like
that you brought that up, actually, and I'm going to tell you what I think this all eventually gets back to after I give a thank you to GoMart here for presenting this episode of ITG as well too. Make sure you're signing up for your GoMart rewards as you travel throughout the Mountain State and onward. GoMart here to keep you going. I've alluded to this a few times on the podcast before, but I think this all ends up with major SEC, major Big 10, and then a third power play. Like I think we get to a Big 3 conferences.
Yes, a quasi.
And yes, I don't think the third conference is a rung below the Big 12 or the Big 10 and the SEC, but it's also a lot higher than any other conferences as well too.
And it can position itself to be very competitive in a 12-team format.
And I think a huge part of that you know what? They should just rebrand and call it, instead of the Big 12, if this all happens, call it the Big Conference, and then we'll have the Big West and the Big East, and they can play for. But I think this all gets back to, for that third conference, if it's going to be called the Big 12 or whatever, intriguing, fun, heart and soul of college football matchups like the backyard brawl, right? That I think is going to. So there's some reports now that Brett Yormark and the Big 12 are talking, okay, do we want to try and poach 4 Pac-12 schools now. Maybe we only want to go 2 with some of this stuff with the ACC. But say you end up in a situation where, you get Pitt, Virginia Tech, Syracuse, Louisville programs. You get maybe Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado as well too.
Sure.
And all of a sudden, you've got a lot of fun historical matchups. You bring Cincinnati back in that fold. You've got your East Coast pocket. You've got your middle of the country, Midwest pocket. You've got your West Coast stuff going on as well too. Like, to me, I think it's going to be the Big Ten and the SEC are the 2 top dogs. But I think that third conference has an opportunity. And I don't mean this in like this is going to sound like very JV when I say this, but it has an opportunity to be the fun conference. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Because it won't, nothing to lose. It won't have a bunch, because make no mistake about it, while the Big Ten and the SEC will be the big players, they'll also have a bunch of division doormats. They'll also have Rutgers, and they'll have Vanderbilt. And I don't know if the new big conference will have those. It'll be
very top heavy.
It'll be a lot of schools that have up years and down years, but there won't be Georgia and Vanderbilt type gaps. There won't be, Ohio State and Rutgers type gaps between these programs.
I mean, you're going to have, for instance, what I forecast in the SEC, you're going to have your Alabamas, your Georgias, et cetera, at the top. And then you're going to have the teams at the bottom that you slap around, Vanderbilt, Texas, on down the line, right?
Right. Horns down. Nice one. I see what you did there. But that is what I think the end game of this has always been. The question to me just until today was, is it going to be the ACC or the Big 12 that survives, is that third conference, and absorbs the other?
That's right.
Man, I think if you're a Big 12 person, or just, someone who attended, lives in the territory of one of those schools, I think today's news is good. Like, I would much rather, and I would have said this for a long time, in terms of the conference scope outlook on Monday, May 15th, as we record this, probably on Tuesday the 16th, as you all listen to it, I would much rather be in WVU's position than Pitt's position right now. And that's not something I would have said the last decade. That's not something I would have said the last decade. Yeah.
Because if you walk this out to, there's no such thing, I don't want to say a logical conclusion, because there isn't one, but for the last handful of years, it's kind of had this building sense of what you just said, Wes. These TV deals, these media rights deals that are coming the way of the Big Ten. We saw what they landed, what figures to be this gargantuan deal with the SEC. That's going to put them financially a cut above everyone else. So then, who fills the number 3 slot? So for the last handful of years, here's what's been at play. It's been this sword fight between the ACC, the Big 12, and the Pac-12. Which is why it was kind of unsettling to see that quote unquote alliance between the ACC and the Pac-12. Well, that was scary for a bit as a Big 12 guy, right?
Sure.
But at the same time, it was short-lived. And the next thing you know, the Pac-12 starts taking some hits. So as USC and UCLA, they're 2 foremost brands, you could argue, traditionally, leave for the Big Ten. That's a major hit. Now they're struggling because of it's kind of put together like a ransom note right now, the rest of the league. And that's why they can't ink any kind of viable media deal that's new, because those schools are looking at it like, if we sign a new deal, we're bound to the terms of that new deal without otherwise we're going to be paying some massive buyout to get out. So now they're kind of staggered. Nothing's really changed, despite, this is the miracle of it. And this is where Brett Yormark comes in. You would think that losing Texas and Oklahoma would have had the same effect on us. But meanwhile, Brett Yormark pivots and lands us this incredibly solid deal that exceeded anybody's expectations. So if you're looking at the 3 conferences vying for that number 3 spot, it was a 3-horse race. Well, I think we could all agree that the Pac-12 has taken on some water, and they're in a desperate situation now. They're reaching out to San Diego State. There's been talk that they're reaching out to Rice. So there's a lot of crazy things playing out west. So that leaves us, okay, well, if it's a 2-horse race, let's look at the ACC and the Big 12. Well, the only way the ACC can be that viable number 3 is if it wiggles out of its current media rights deal. And the truth is that in and of itself would disintegrate most likely the conference. If you wiggle out of that deal, there's not going to be an ACC left because those teams at the top will scatter. So who does that leave as the number 3 almost by default? So if you just game this thing out, again, we've learned in recent times, these things can change on a dime in crazy and very quick ways that are unpredictable. But at this juncture, what you just said, I think, West kind of captures it. In the last handful of years, maybe when the Texas-Oklahoma news broke, we're like, whoa, I'd feel better being a Pitt person than a WVU person right now in terms of what the future looks like. But I'm not so sure in the couple years since then, in part because of the new media rights deal that we landed, and that we feel like we're on very secure footing. We're being aggressive. We're on the offensive. But when I wouldn't want to be part of the ACC right now, I wouldn't want to be part of the Pac-12 right now. And that's changed very quickly. Let's see if it changes again.
No, it's a great call by you. It absolutely it's amazing how that pendulum swings back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
So something could certainly change. But right now, like I said, this kind of where we started this conversation, this feels like the first domino once again. We'd kind of been waiting. We'd kind of been in a holding pattern since the Texas and Oklahoma news, since the USC and UCLA news.
If you take whatever lands in as that third conference, because that's just it, the winner is going to grow in strength and numbers and quality. Whoever lands that third spot is going to end up in a far more attractive place than it begins, because it's going to attract the best of the other two, right?
Correct.
So you have an opportunity to, you might have the power two in the form of the Big Ten and the SEC. And that third league, if it turns out to be the Big 12, you could be moving forward looking at, I talked about Army Navy, who knows? That's not top of the order, but I'm just saying, what if you had a third league that was home to the Backyard Brawl, home to the Army Navy game, home to the Holy War with Utah and BYU? There's a lot of good, interesting, captivating football outside of the SEC and the Big Ten. And I think that whatever conference wins the spot as that number 3 could serve as an absolutely viable platform to attract the best of all the rest.
100%.
And that is quite a product.
It'd be a lot of fun. It'd be quite a product. Like I said, you might not have Ohio State and Michigan. You might not have Georgia and Alabama, but man, you would have a lot of schools that are solid athletic programs, passionate programs with a lot of history, with a lot of tradition, without maybe having some of the division doormats. Jed, to kind of start to wrap this up here, the Backyard Brawl, right, is signed through 2025 and then resumes in 2029, right? There's that 3-year lull there in the series. I'm going to go ahead and go out on a limb here. You remember where you were when you heard me predict it. 2026, WVU and Pitt are going to play, even though they're not scheduled to right now, and it's going to be a Big 12 conference game. How about that? That?
Wow.
Or a big conference.
2025.
I'm going with big conference, and we're gonna have the Big East, rest in peace, and we're gonna have the Big West, and it's gonna be a lot of fun. It certainly is. The last thing I can't wait for when this all happens is, how you see this now, the ACC will put out a highlight package of Darrelle Revis, and you'll be like, wait a second, he didn't play in the ACC.
This is the Big East. Yeah.
This all leads to, Jed, Big 12 legend Larry Fitzgerald, Big 12 legend Aaron Donald.
Oh, absolutely it does. Big 12 legend Tony Dorsett.
Big 12 legend Lamar Jackson. I mean, it's going to be fantastic. It's going to be fantastic. I can't wait.
Well, we had Big 12 legend Major Harris, when we first.
You know it. Yeah. I can't wait for Big 12 legend Carmelo Anthony on the basketball court. It's going to be.
I'm telling you,
it's going to be fantastic.
It's so captivating. What could be? Those top two, more power to them. They found a way to maximize the dollar. They found a way to maximize their brand. And they continue to do so. And they're not done chopping off the heads and collecting the scalps that they're going to collect to build their brand. But however that settles, once the dust does settle, there's a lot of captivating, entertaining football that's going to attract a lot of eyes with a lot of passionate fan bases that is left outside of those two. And it doesn't matter if Wes and Jed understand and appreciate that. What matters is the decision makers in the seats that make these things happen understand that, whether it's at the TV side of things, whether it's, I've often said, when you look at the market cap of Apple, you can see where some of this could go. If they want to get interested in so the possibilities are boundless for a third league, so long as you end up clamoring and jockeying and finding your way into that third spot to attract the best of the others. And then I think we can all have a happy ending as we hate each other.
I think you're absolutely right. That's the dream. That's what we're hoping for. And maybe today was the first domino to all of that happening to us. Once again, being in a conference with some geographic rivals. Maybe Pitt, maybe Virginia Tech, Syracuse, Louisville, Cincinnati. Who knows? The possibilities are endless, but maybe we got a little bit closer to that dream becoming reality today. Like we always say with these type of topics, we will continue to discuss this and update this as soon as there is anything new. A final thank you to our friends at Fortis for presenting this episode of ITG. For roof performance and financial security guaranteed, visit fortis.us.com. Jed, this was fun. I always love a good conference realignment episode. I always love the chance to get a couple of my my Pitt jabs in there. I gave you the Thanos line, right? The other, like when Pitt and Syracuse and these schools do their entry interviews into the Big 12, like I just want to be standing in the background like Jim Carrey and Ace Ventura, just talking out of my backside. Excuse me, let me ask you a couple questions. How does it feel to be back here chasing West Virginia tail?
I'm thinking more Office Space interviews, like interview for your job. Like, what exactly do you do here all day?
Pitt goes to the basement. Pitt goes to the basement, and everybody steals their stapler. All right.
Love it.
That'll do it for this edition of ITG. The one thing we ask of you, as always, is to be an ear and tell an ear about your new favorite WVU football podcast. We don't know what the next, week or two will look like, but we obviously will be back sooner rather than later. Thank you again to everybody in the comments that has reached out and wished my wife and I well. Do really appreciate it. And obviously it'll be an exciting weekend at the Diamond in Texas for the Mountaineers. It'll be an exciting weekend in the Uhler household as our family of three becomes a family of four. So a thanks to everybody for
expecting that text, man.
We absolutely, and we'll get her all dressed up in some Mountaineer gear and put some pictures out on the social media as well too. And so thanks to Jed and Owen and to all of our listeners out there for being flexible with me with that, as maybe our schedule will be a little off here for the next couple weeks. But as always, you know where to find us in the Gun Podcast and all your social media channels, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcast. For Owen Schmitt and Jed Drenning, I'm Wesley Uhler. You've been in the Gun.